Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister at the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 105 of the Midweek Bible Study. We want to let you know that we appreciate you being here. We want to welcome everyone, whether you are watching it right now or whether you will watch the replay later on. We want to let you know that we appreciate you being here and that you've decided to spend some time with us. You've decided to spend some time studying the Word of God and trying to get a better understanding of the Scriptures. We hope that you've had a wonderful day today. I know it's been pretty nice here, a little rainy in the middle of the day, but it's been a pretty nice day otherwise. And so hope you've had a good day over at wherever you're at as well. We want to always extend you an invitation if you're someone that is in the Portia area. We are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. Right now, we are meeting at 10 o'clock for Bible class and 11 o'clock for worship services on Sunday morning. And on Sunday night, we meet at 5 o'clock. And on Wednesday nights, we meet at 6 o'clock. And so if you're in our area during one of those times, please feel free to come and visit with us. We would love to see you. We would love to visit with you and worship with you. We always like to meet new brothers and sisters in Christ. And so hope you can take advantage of that if you are in our area or around those times. We would love to see you. Also, we want to let you know that if you have any questions or comments about what we studied tonight, we don't want to leave any misunderstandings or leave anything misconstrued. And so if you have any questions about what we studied tonight, please feel free to get in contact with us. We would love to talk with you and to speak with you, about the Bible. It's always something that is a worthy thing in order to study, and so we would love to talk with you about it. And so hope you know that you have that available to you, or if you would like to suggest maybe a verse or a topic for a future episode, you can do that as well. You just get in contact with me and let me know what your suggestion is. But as we said, we really want to let you know we appreciate everyone being here tonight. Tonight we have a guest. He is the minister at the Portia Church of Christ down here in Jonesboro. He's also a fellow graduate from Crowley's College with myself, and I know he's been on here before, and I know that you're going to enjoy what he has to say, and he's going to provide some good insight for us in our study tonight. And so, Chase, it's good to have you here tonight. We appreciate you taking the time to study with us. And for the people who don't know you, why don't you just tell them a little bit about yourself?
Well, it's good to see you again always, Seth. Glad to be a part of the program. Proud of what you're doing. Glad you're doing it. He said it already. My name is Chase Almond. I've been the preacher here at Grace Point in Jonesboro since October of 18. So it's coming up on 4 years now. But mostly people know me for my wife and my girls. I'm married to Jamie, and I've got Sadie and Ellie as my daughters. But the best part about me is that I've been friends with Seth for about 10 years now.
It's been a little bit, hasn't it? Yeah.
It has. Yep. Since 2012, I think.
Yeah, it's but I know you're doing good work down there at Grace Point, and so
thank you.
What have you been teaching on or preaching on down there lately?
Well, like many churches, Truth for Today came around and they offered their Life of Christ program. And our elders saw that and we were excited about that. So for the past year and continuing, we're going to be looking at the life of Christ. So far, genealogy-wise, in the course of his history, we just saw him feed the 5,000 and walk on water. So that's where we're at. But studying the life of Christ for an entire year, it's been really encouraging so far. I've really gotten a lot out of it.
I think that would be a worthy thing to study. When you take a look at things to look at, in the Bible, I think you can't go wrong when you're looking at Jesus. And so
that's right.
I know they're going to be hearing some great lessons from that. And so we want to let you know we appreciate you being here tonight. We've also got several other people who have chimed in here already. We've got Carlene Skinner. She's here with us, and she says, "Good evening. Hope you had a good day today," as well as Kathy Davis from Portia. She says, "Hello. It's good to have you here. It's great to see you here." We got the Tillmans from Ravenden. It's good to have you guys here. Hope everything is going well up there. It's good to see Cheryl Herring here. She's here with us. Hope that you are doing well as well. We got Crystal Hudson is with us, and she's going to be coming back to Arkansas, and she's in Illinois right now. She's going to be coming back to Arkansas in just a little bit, and so it's good to hear from you. I hope that you guys have a safe travels coming back down here. We appreciate you listening in with us tonight. But tonight we are going to take a look at a king in the Old Testament, a man by the name of Hezekiah. And there are some kings in the Bible that we don't know that much about. That we maybe just have a description of their morality or their stance with God, and maybe a little blurb about something notable that they did. But then there's other kings that we have that will have a little bit more information. And King Hezekiah falls into that latter category. If you take a look at 2 Kings chapters 18 through 20, we read about his story and some of the things that he went through. Hezekiah was someone who would face some pretty substantial obstacles. He would face some substantial problems in his way. Being a king is never an easy job, especially when you're facing the difficulties that Israel did at this time. And Hezekiah was going to have to figure out how to navigate, this tricky situation, and how he was going to help his people, survive. And so we have that story you've recorded for us in here. But Chase, when you think about King, Hezekiah, you think about who he is and the story that you read, in the scriptures. What are your first thoughts when you hear his story told?
Well, like you said, the first thing I think of how difficult his job would have been. Doing the right thing is not always doing the easy thing, and we know that certainly. But his story just shows you how powerful a good example of a good Christian really can be, even in the darkest places, even in the worst times. But the transverse is also true. It's an excellent example of how corrupt a bad person can be, since Hezekiah stands out as a good king, not a perfect king, but a good king. And one of the things I try and look at the story is where I would fit in. And of course, everyone wants to say that they would be like Hezekiah. And there's a lot we can resonate with from him. But we would be one of the people there in Judah under him. Likely we wouldn't be the king. And it's really interesting to see how the people, if they have a good king, they do good and they're morally good. But if they have a bad king, they're just as guilty, they're just as bad, they're just as immoral. So it's really interesting to see how fickle the people are and how back and forth they go with righteousness. They didn't stay righteous after Hezekiah and make the next king be righteous either. So how good a good leader can be. But if Hezekiah wasn't in Judah, if he wasn't in an immoral kingdom, his actions really wouldn't have been transformative. They really wouldn't have been incredible. They really wouldn't have been noticeable. All he did was what any good Christian should do. It's only incredible because he was in such a bad place. So a great example for us to learn from, definitely, but absolutely, I can imagine he was weary and tired of doing the right thing all the time.
That's a very interesting point. I hadn't thought about that, but I think you're exactly right. Hezekiah, one of the notable things that Hezekiah did was, destroy an idol that Israel had been worshiping, and you think that that's a bold move or a great move, and it was, but then you think like you just mentioned, that's what they should do. That's the
right.
That should be the standard of what they do, and so that is an interesting thing to think about, because when you look at the spiritual state, of Israel and the decline that it makes from the time of David into where we find it, now is pretty significant. And they a lot of and you can say a lot of the problems that they're going to face are going to be stemming from their lack of faithfulness and their lack of trust, in God, or their lack of obedience, to God. And but like you said, two things that make a big difference, in someone's faithfulness to God is, leadership and a good example, to follow. And that's something that is true, in the church today, as it was, in the kingdom, back then. We need people to not only look for good leadership, but strive to be, good leaders, themselves, because we all have the ability to project that type of influence or that type of example in some manner. We may not be a king that is over an entire nation of people. But even if it's just a small group, we may be able to kind of have that type of influence. And so we need to be prepared to use it in the right way, because as I think you mentioned, the Bible's filled with plenty of other kings who did the opposite of what Hezekiah did, who did evil in the sight of the Lord, as the kind of how it describes it. Yeah. And they got Israel in trouble a lot of times, and they were a negative example. And so I think we need to be conscious about how we use that.
Yeah, a lot of people would apply that story to our day. How corrupt is America? How many idols are we worshiping as Americans? And say, well, we've got to tear down the walls. We've got to storm the buildings. We've got to do. But if we take Hezekiah just as an individual, very simply, he used the authority granted to him to the extent that his authority could grant him. So we can't tear down kingdoms. We can't transform nations over the course of years. But what does our home look like? Are there foreign idols in our homes? And we've got to do what we can to make it right. It's funny, I know we'll probably get to it, but one thing I kind of overlooked, one of the idols that he had to tear down was the bronze serpent that Moses had made in the desert. And when people were bit by the serpent, they went down to the serpent, and that's how they got healed. The people had even begun to worship that as an idol. Hezekiah said, you've got it so backed up. This is a good thing that you've turned into a bad thing because you've lost sight of God. So that's the application I need to make for my family, and we as a church need to make. Are there idols in my home? Never mind what the world's doing. You can't change the world. What are you doing in your home? I like that observation, Seth. I like that.
Yeah, I think was it Nehushtan? I think, is that what it's called? The serpent. I might have to look that up, but yeah, that was originally. That was something that Moses set up in order, and people would look at it when they got bit by the snake, and it was a very good thing. But
symbolic of Christ.
But over the years, they had completely turned it around into something that was supposed to be. And I think another good thing I think that you mentioned was Hezekiah used what he had as far as his authority in the kingship. And if you think about the parable of the talents that Jesus tells, that's what God requires of us. Like I said, we don't have to go and tear down a mountain in order to be pleasing to God, but we do have to use what God has given us in order to to make a difference. And if we can do that, I think we'll not only follow Hezekiah's example, but we're going to follow the example that Jesus set forth, and a lot of other notable characters in the Bible. And so we need to be ready to use what we have for the glory of God when we're called to do it.
That's right.
It's also good to have Gwen Vaughn here with us. It's good to have you
Gwen.
here. She says, hey, Seth and Chase. And someone you might know, Jamie Almond. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Jamie tagging my dad.
She's here with us as well. And good to have you. But we know, as we already mentioned, this was a difficult time, for Israel. And as we already alluded to, some of it was their own doing, some of it was the doing of others. But when you look at Hezekiah, what was the world like, in his day? If you kind of put his character in the context of the story, what was the world like during Hezekiah's day?
Well, seemingly from the context, it was war, and it was always war. Right now, we're in the point of the Assyrian influence in the nation. The Assyrians were conquering everybody. They were running over everybody. The northern tribe of God's people, Israel, were going to be taken over by Assyria. They were going to be controlled by them. And there's Judah next on the chopping block. Now, Hezekiah, a young man taking the throne, we don't know how many years he got to tear down the temples before the war came to his front door, trying to lead the nation. So he's not only going against tradition, going against what's comfortable to them, tearing down false idols, tearing down these temples and cutting down the Asherah pole. The people probably were upset about that. Now they've got a huge enemy on their front doorstep, about to knock it down, about to destroy them. So the people were likely upset with their king. They like the prosperity that they got, but now the enemy's here on our front door. We haven't built up an army. We've got no security. We don't have great wealth. All we have is destroyed temples. And now Assyria is about to come conquer us, just like they conquered Israel. They're They took over Samaria. Now we're next. So we sit back in our comfortable world, not really in the middle of any major war, certainly not on our shores or on our front doors. And we look at them being idolatrous, look at them being evil, filled with iniquity, and we judge them quickly. But again, if we're in the crowds, Hezekiah's father was immoral, and his father before that was immoral. If we trace it just 2 years back, I guess it all comes from Solomon. Solomon invited all those women, and he accepted their foreign gods. So Hezekiah is trying to clean up that mess. But Jotham, which was his grandfather, allowed the people to worship God and idols. But Ahaz was actively fighting against God and promoted only idols. And then here comes Hezekiah trying to make the people see clearly and see common sense and tear down the false idols and worship God. All the while, this huge conquering force is coming down on them, really threatening the existence of the Judeans who may be concerned that their king only cares about false gods. And what difference does that really make? So a lot of powerful lessons there. And again, doing the right thing is not always an easy thing. He was probably exhausted. And now here comes this big bad Assyrian wolf about to devour him. So you can imagine it's not really a comfortable place for a Christian to be.
Oh, absolutely not. And I think if you, this was indeed a time of great conflict. And God had warned them before. He said, if you're someone who forsakes me, these things are going to come. These things are going to happen. And so many times Israel is saved not by their own might, but by the power of God. And so we know He's the reason why they were able to prosper in the first place. But King Hoshea was the last king of the northern kingdom. And if you look at verse 1 there in 18, Hezekiah begins to reign in his third year, I believe. Yeah, in the third year of Hoshea. And so 2 years into Hezekiah's reign, I believe it's about year 5, the Assyrians take over the northern kingdom. And so he's not on the job all that long before his neighbor is carried away into captivity. And we know from the history that the northern kingdom would never return. They would be replaced by other people. They would be scattered across the area, and they would never be able to return. And so now the Assyrians are coming to do the exact same thing to the southern kingdom. And they've already had the example to think about what happened to their neighbors and to their brothers. And so they think this may be the same thing that's going to happen to them. Mm-hmm. And as we'll see later on, throughout the story, the army that the Assyrians brought was not just a light fighting force, but it was a huge army that Israel had no hope from a military perspective of beating. And so this seemed like an impossible situation that they were in. But also, like as you mentioned, when there's also that sense of the spiritual nature of the people. And I think there may have been there was probably quite a bit of maybe spiritual confusion among the people when you consider as you recalled the examples of the past kings and how some of them promoted idols and some of them were kind of indifferent, and some of them and Hezekiah here he's promoting following the one true God. And so if you're someone who has you haven't seen some of those great miracles in the past, such as parting the Red Sea or anything of those that grand in nature, and you hear them these different messages about what to do with your spiritual self. There's probably a lot of confusion in that day, and that caused a lot of problems. And we know in our world today, that's the same problem we have today as well. There's a lot of voices out there that will tell people what they should do and where they should go, and how they should invest their spiritual self. And it takes that's one reason why we go by the Bible, we go by the scriptures, because that gives us the standard to go off of, and it can clear up that confusion that we may have. But it was definitely a very very difficult time in Israel that Hezekiah was going to have to deal with.
Yeah, he had to do the dirty work. He had to clean up the mess, and that's not anyone's favorite job.
No, and certainly it was not. But if you think about the maybe some of the specifics when you take a look at his story and think about some of the specific problems that he faced, and we know that the whole story of Hezekiah, and again, we're taking a pretty broad view of the story. I highly encourage you to read through, 2 Kings chapter 18 verses and through chapter 20 to read the story in its entirety, because there's no way we can cover everything, in the time, that we have. And we're just taking kind of a broad overview of the life of Hezekiah. And so there's a lot to go through, but we know that he's someone who would face, different challenges, throughout his life. But what are some of the specific obstacles that Hezekiah was facing throughout his story?
Well, you pick up any I miss, because I might. But the first obstacle would be his upbringing. His mother may have been more righteous, and that's where he may have gotten his righteousness from, but his father was not at all. His father was one of the worst of the worst. And one of the traditions of that time, especially we see many of these evil kings do, is sacrificing their sons. So first, he survived that. He survived being sacrificed to a foreign idol. And then he decides to do the right thing, to fight the good fight. So the first obstacle I've got to get across, if I'm the leader of this people, is the idolatry. I've got to, since they don't have morality, maybe some of the older generations did, you've got to almost force your morality on them. And they have to choose it and all that. It's free will still, but you're changing a kingdom from an idolatrous, again, chaotic, who do we serve kind of nation into a God-fearing following nation. So that's really the first obstacle. And that's not even addressing every other duty that you needed to do as a king. You still had to hold court. You still had to handle disagreements. You still had to protect your neck as people kind of came against you. So all of these little things that we can kind of lose behind the scenes were great challenges in and of themselves. But then he's got the Assyrians. And largely in his story, the Assyrians were the main threat, not worse than Satan and idolatry and all that. But the Assyrians were the main physical threat. And they were conquering Israel. They were conquering everyone. And part of what they were doing is they also said that God had sent them to conquer these nations. God told us we were going to conquer you. So now he's got this other faith claim coming against his own faith claim. And if the lives of the people are threatened for your faith claim and not their own, they're really going to rise up against you. So I wonder if there was any rebellion, if there was any headaches that he had to deal with that aren't recorded, just because being a king was so difficult. But the Assyrians and the idolatry were the main obstacles that I saw that he faced there, and dealing with that as a man, guarding your own morality, and not giving up. These are incredible obstacles for anyone.
Yeah, Hezekiah was 25 years old when he got the king, and I wouldn't want that job at the age that I am now. But 25 years ago, or when I was 25, I don't think I could have handled that. But
no way.
But yeah, that's an interesting, when you think about his upbringing and his how he ended up being the man that he is. And probably his mother probably had a large part to do with that. But you think of, when Solomon, got the throne, when he was given that responsibility, God said, I'm going to give you, anything that you want, what is your request? And Solomon, he requested wisdom. That's what he's known for. He's one of the wisest kings, because even at that, age that he was, Solomon understood. He said, I need help in doing this. This is a job that is, beyond where I'm at now. Please give me wisdom so that I can, govern my people. And of course, God blessed him with that and a whole lot more. And so, yeah, it's a lot of times with this story, I try not to kind of backseat, quarterback, with these characters, because we're in the situation that they're in, and it's easy to make decisions for them when we don't have to pay the price for, their the actions that they take. And so But this was he was also in a very, very precarious position, and there was probably, I bet there was quite a few people that maybe disagreed with Hezekiah and said, you're doing this wrong. There's always someone that's saying, I can do better. You're doing this wrong, and he had to deal, with that. But we know the main problem in the first part of the story, was the physical threat, the Assyrians. The scriptures mention that that I think it was 185,000 where it was there that eventually showed up, at Jerusalem. And one of the taunts that the Assyrians would bring against Israel was that they would say, we'll give you, 2,000 horses if you can put riders on them. If you can put people on them who can ride them, then we'll just give you them. And just 2,000. They didn't have that much, in order at this point, in their cycle of their nation. And so that was the big problem that he was going to have. And later on in life, he would struggle with sickness. He would get sick, and Isaiah the prophet would come to him, and he would say, get your affairs in order. Get ready, because this is the end of the road for you. You're going to die. And of course, we know at that time, he turned his face to the wall, and he prayed to God. And eventually, Isaiah would come back and tell him, "You got 15 years, left to live," and and he would be able to survive that. And so he suffered, from these outside threats, with the Assyrians. He suffered from the inside threats, with the sickness that he had. And at the very end of his story, we find him, as you said, he was a good king, but he wasn't a perfect king. And he would struggle with a little bit of pride as well at the end of his story, when he begins to show off his treasures and show off the things that he has when he probably shouldn't have. And and which is definitely, like I said earlier, it's easy to say you shouldn't have done that, but it's harder when you're in that situation. And so those are the main three obstacles that I see when I look at this story. He had to face it on all fronts. And if you look at verse 2 there in 18, it says that he reigned for 29 years. And so this takes place over a 29-year period. And so there's a lot of time in between these events, probably, but these are significant points, in his life. And so if you're going to be a follower of God, if you're going to be someone who is a righteous person, then you're going to have to face obstacles. You're going to have to face problems sometimes, and they can come from all different directions, just like they did here with Hezekiah. And so we need to be prepared as a people to stay faithful, no matter where these threats, these temptations come from, whether they come from people trying to convince you of something, whether it comes from sickness, whether it comes from choices that you've made on yourself or other people have made, that stem maybe from your character. They can come from all different places, and we have to be prepared to face them as people.
Yeah. And I wouldn't even call, one thing interesting I thought of while you were talking, I wouldn't call his faith an obstacle, but it definitely was a challenge. As you and I now are ministering to people, how often are we telling people to trust in God during prosperous times? When it's easy to trust in God, people like me fail to trust in God. Trusting in God is an obstacle too great for normal people living normal lives to do. You think there was ever a time that Hezekiah wanted to not trust God anymore? When the Assyrians were coming against him, when the people were coming against him, when he was about to die? So it's not an obstacle trusting in God, but it definitely was a challenge, staying true to the faith. We can't overlook his faith as a challenge as well.
Yeah, and that as you mentioned his past, it doesn't sound like he had a whole lot of support there. Of course, we know he has Isaiah there. He's someone who probably helped him along and kind of helped him a little bit with that. But like I said, this was his decisions to make, and it was something that he had to work through. It's good to have Keith Almond here, another person you might know. He's here with us, and Sadie, she says, "Hi, Daddy."
So, there we go.
Hey, a shout out to Sadie.
Hi,
But
Sadie.
this is this of course is like I said, he did face a lot, and then
Mm,
as Jesus would say, if you're going to be a Christian, then you have to be prepared to suffer for your faith, as he told his disciples in the. I know we're going through the book of Matthew in our Wednesday night class, and
mm.
we just went over that section in which he sent out the limited commission, and he told them, you're going to have to face all these things if you go out in my name. Threats, persecution, even to the point of your life, and so you need to be ready to deal with that. And so being a Christian is not just a cruise downhill, but sometimes it takes a lot of effort in order to stay faithful. But as we kind of alluded to several of these already, but when you look at Hezekiah, as we say, he's mentioned quite positively, when his introduction, throughout the in his record, in the Old Testament. And so, what are some positive characteristics that we can take from Hezekiah the king and his journey, and how he dealt with these problems, and how he served in his role as king? What are some good things that we can take from this man?
If you want to pull up verse 3 of 18, and then we'll look at 5 through 7, this is his point where he's bragged on the most. If I was Hezekiah reading this, I would love this part about myself. In verse 3, it says, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that David and his fathers done. Then it includes even tearing down Moses' statue. And then in verse 5 through 7, he's a good guy. He's a good king because of this. He trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that there was none like him among all the kings of Judah after him, nor among those who were before him. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but kept the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses, and the Lord was with him. Wherever he went out, he prospered. He rebelled against Assyria and would not serve him. So that's the main part where it talks about the good qualities, the morality that he had. But really, again, making it very simple here, he wasn't a superhero of the faith. He didn't have any powers that you and I don't have. Why was this guy a good king? He trusted God and did the right thing. And that comes up several times in his story, and he puts feet on his faith. He lives out that trust. It's one thing to have the trust, and one thing to have that trust tested. So it was legitimate trust, it was legitimate faith, but that's all that it was. He believed in God, and he followed him. He did not depart from God, so God did not depart from him. And that's what makes him be a good king. Judah had 8 good kings. Hezekiah was the best of them. And the only time they were called a good king is if they followed God. Even if the others included idolatry and God, at least they followed God, so they got called good. But Hezekiah was the best of all of the kings of Judah. Israel didn't have any good kings. But what made Hezekiah the best king, he wasn't the most prosperous, wasn't the most powerful, may not have even been the most faithful, but he, when the time needed it, he was faithful to God and he followed him. That's really all that it was. And not only that, he stood against evil. There's a lot of apathy in Christians today. There's a lot of apathy in me today. I'll promote Jesus when I need to, but standing up against evil, that's really uncomfortable. That's really a challenge for me. I'm not eloquent. I'm not wise. I'm not strong. I'm not brave. So not only did he stand up for what was good, he stood against what was immoral and actively tore down the temples. That's where we see him cutting down the false idols, cutting down the Asherah pole, tearing down the places, the high places. He had to reopen the temple there in Jerusalem, pulling off wooden boards nailed shut that his father had put there, reinstituting the Levitical order, replacing God in the seat of priority for Judah, and then trusting in God against Assyria. When Assyria comes with their faith claim, saying that they're from God and they're powerful, and you don't even have 2,000 men in your army to fight against us, who are you going to trust in? Egypt? Are you going to turn to them? We've destroyed everybody else. No one else as God has saved them. Everyone we've defeated has claimed God is going to save them, but their God didn't save them. What makes yours any different? But he prayed before God. He trusted in his prophet who was speaking more closely to God than him. And it said that he had a relationship with God. But that's what made him That's his best positive characteristic. So as I look at Hezekiah, I don't really look at him as a great king. I look at him as a Christian and a great one, only
Mhm.
because he remained faithful. And when he was challenged, he was found to have faith. So that can be really encouraging for us today. Just be faithful, remain faithful, trust in God.
Absolutely, and he kind of reminds me of kind of like a David. When we read
Mhm.
about him, yeah, it's well documented, it's well known that David was not a perfect king. He was someone who made some very high profile, mistakes, some very very serious mistakes. But one characteristic of David that we always know is that he never turned away from God. Even when he
Mhm.
was confronted with his sin, he always repented of it. He never chased after idols. He never, pushed God away. He was someone who was always faithful to God, even though he made those such horrible, mistakes. And that's something that is so highly valued because, as we know, the if we're someone who pursues perfection, we're never going to obtain it. But God is someone who, through what Jesus has done, He provides us that avenue of forgiveness. We have
Mhm.
forgiveness through His sacrifice, and if we have that, we know that even when we do make those mistakes, we can come back, and we can always come back stronger. And Hezekiah, in this sense, like you said, it's one thing in order to trust God, when things are good, or even when things are moderate. But
Right.
if you're familiar with the history of ancient warfare and such, when a nation conquered another nation, usually what happened to that conquered king was not good. Either they would be killed in a brutal way, or they would be set up in a humiliating way in order to assert the dominance of the conquering king. And so the stakes in this case were extremely high, for Hezekiah, and yet he's someone who still trusted, in God. And there was, this was it was almost more than a life and death situation, for Hezekiah, but yet he still, kept his trust in God, firm. And so it's important for us to be someone who doesn't let the surrounding circumstances in our world shape our trust in God and shape the way in our relationship with God. Because if you're someone who watches the news, or if you're someone who keeps up with world events, there's something that can cause you distress and anxiety just about every day. And usually bad news is something that travels very very fast. But if we let those things be things that kind of influence and chip away at our trust in God, then it's going to leave a mark on our faith, and it's going to eventually erode it, maybe even erode it completely. But if we follow maybe the example that Hezekiah has here, and we're someone who is firm in that trust, no matter what happens to us on the outside, that can be something that can keep us strong even in those heavy moments. Like he said, because a lot of times, life is something that throws some heavy things at us, and
Mm.
in order to get through them, we need that strength, we need that security that we can find, from God. And but like we've already mentioned, sometimes that trust is tested. Sometimes it has to be a given. It has to be tried and tested in that fire before it can emerge. And so we need to be ready to go through that as Christians today.
Yeah, and I really don't envy Hezekiah for how alone he must have felt. My trust in God is my own, but it has largely been taught to me. I've been
Mm,
told by family and friends and people in the church to trust in God, and I've seen the examples of what it looks like for someone to trust God. Hezekiah had none of that.
mhm.
No one around him, no one in his family, no one besides the prophet told him to trust God. So that trust for God came from his heart. So credit to Hezekiah for that. He was alone many times. He was never without God, but he likely felt alone. And that is really depressing and difficult for people today.
Mhm. And like Gwen says here, he says sounds like a very very strong king. And we know what made him strong was not his physical strength or his wealth or anything, but it was that trust. It was that strength of character that he had. like we mentioned David earlier. Samuel was trying to pick out a king, and he picked the biggest, tallest one, and God said, "That's not who I want. I don't look on the outside, but I look on the inside. I look on the heart of man." And that's what made Hezekiah a strong king. But we know that he had those positive characteristics, and but we know he wasn't perfect. He had some negative ones as well. And I don't think these are as much maybe as much documented as the good ones, as you mentioned. I think it was in a verse 5, where it says that there was no one before him that was as good as him, or no one after him that was as good as him. So he has a pretty positive report. But but there maybe is one case in which he kind of maybe makes a mistake during the end of his life. But what are if any, what are some of the negative characteristics that you get from Hezekiah?
Well, if you want to start pulling up chapter 20, verse 13, that's where we'll see his main one. But like you prefaced as well, we don't want to be armchair quarterbacks here. We don't just want to tear down Hezekiah. He was called the best king of his day for a reason. So he was a good moral man. But everybody loves dirty laundry. Everybody loves skeletons in closets, and Hezekiah has got them as well. And I noticed three, and you may notice more, but the main one, I pulled a part of that. After Assyria is conquered, and after Judah now is in a prosperous time, they start accruing more wealth. They get likely many of the spoils that the Assyrians had. So now that he's also been revived by God, given 15 more years of life, not really sure why God did that, whether he wanted to spare Judah from the immoral king coming for 15 more years, or whether he loved Hezekiah enough to give him 15 more years of life. But after literally being saved from the grave, we see that pride come in that everyone sees in the end of chapter 20. And just to sum it up in verse 13 welcomes in the king of Babylon, welcomes in the envoys of the Babylonians. He welcomed them, and he showed them all his treasure house, the silver, the gold, the spices, the precious oil, his armory, all that was found in his storehouses. There was nothing in his house or in all his realm that Hezekiah did not show them. And for a prosperous king, this likely took more than just an afternoon. He likely paraded these things in front of the Babylonians, and that's where we see the pride come in. And we don't have to put that on him. We see that revealed here in the story. He, for some reason, had such a good life of faith, but at the end, that pride, I just conquered the Assyrians, now I've conquered death. Maybe he thought that power was his rather than God's, because he's the one that demanded the sign, tell God to make the shadow go up this certain number of steps. So that pride creeps in, and he starts bragging. Look at all my wealth. He showed him everything. And you want to talk about a bad strategy. Don't show what a potential enemy everything in your kingdom. Here's where the money is. Here's where our defenses are. He showed them everything, almost welcoming destruction. And that's exactly what the prophet said. The prophet Isaiah asks him, what have you done? He said, well, I showed him everything. And because of that, you're going to be destroyed. You're going to fall. And that's where I picked up two more. If we look at verse 19, if you can scroll down to 19, something I really don't like, and you can comment on his pride and then see what you think about these other two. But if you scroll down to 19, after he experiences this prideful moment and hears from Isaiah that he's going to be destroyed and his sons are going to be taken away, they're going to be made into eunuchs, his attitude right here in verse 19, I really don't like it. And I think it's maybe because I see this in myself a little bit. He hears this bad news as an old man who's already kind of died already, that his kingdom's going to fall, that his family's going to be destroyed. And he says, with cynicism and apathy, he says, hey, the word of the Lord that you've spoken is good. For he thought, if I'm not going to be there, he said, why not? If there will be peace now and security in my days, okay, sure, yeah, why not destruction later? And I really hate to see this in Hezekiah. Again, not to put blame on him, but to put blame on me. I really, too many times in my life, have the attitude of, if it's comfortable for me, that's all I care about. I don't care about future generations. I did my job. They're going to get themselves in their own trouble. But it's really his pride that destroys Judah. And that attitude of contempt there, where he just says, hey, my time is done. Why not peace in my day and destruction in theirs? I really don't like that attitude. It's a terrible one. Don't have that part of Hezekiah when you follow his example. But the last part, I almost seem to miss it here, is in the beginning of verse 21. His son, the son of the greatest, most moral, best Christian, if we're going to call him that, in Judah's time, became one of the worst kings. And I think we overlook that. And again, Manasseh's, his son's immorality is his own. I'm not placing the sins of the son on the morality of the father, but to have such faith in God and have such a deep trust in God and a deep relationship with God, and your children to still become corrupt. His son sacrificed his grandson on an altar. He shed the blood of innocence. He in verse 9 of chapter 21, Manasseh led Judah astray to do more evil than all the nations had done before, that God destroyed before the people of Israel. That's the son of the most righteous king of Judah. So it really, now that I'm a father, I think so much about the example I give to my children, to my girls. And you see these great men still have immoral children. And again, it is their own immorality. You cannot control full-grown adults. But to not have the ability to impart at least some semblance of faith, Manasseh came and tore down everything that Hezekiah did. He tore down all of the good temples. He brought up all of the altars again. So was Hezekiah so focused, and again, he had a tough job, but was he so focused on being a king that he forgot to be a father? And I've overlooked that many times in the past, where we just say, well, he was prideful and that was it. But really, his attitude at the end of his life was a bad one. And then for his son's immorality to be so bad, it really makes me wonder at what kind of father he was. And that's stipulation. We don't know. Could just be Manasseh was a bad egg. But that makes me wonder as a father today if there's anything he did that I need to not do so my children don't become Manassehs.
That is quite interesting, and 19 is an interesting verse when you look at this story, and this is a kind of a trend, and like you said, that other people did have problems with. You think of people such as Gideon and such as Solomon, people who were very good. They were very very trusting in God, but at the end of their life, for some reason, maybe they got complacent or whatever. They made those mistakes, and Hezekiah seems to be in that kind of in that boat. And you think of people like like a David and like Samuel and like Eli, people who were great men, but their children did some pretty terrible things. Yeah. And of course, like you said, everyone has a personal responsibility, but I think as Christians, we also should have a responsibility in order to teach and provide for that next generation, or for those individuals that maybe even when it doesn't affect us. And like he says, why not if there will be peace and security in my days? And which maybe we know that he went through a lot. He probably in a way he deserved that, but still, like you said, that attitude, it is kind of iffy, and it's sometimes we're not as quick to act on things when we don't feel the consequences of it, when we don't face the effects of it. Sometimes we don't take it as seriously, and I think that's sometimes it's a challenge sometimes in order to kind of put yourself in the position of someone else, and to try to look at a situation from their perspective, and when they're the one that's dealing with with these certain things, and if we need to do what we can in order to take that time in order to help people to maybe to form their own relationship with God, and then to build that trust in God. Like you said, we can't do that for them, but we can encourage and provide maybe assistance in making that happen, and which is it's a tough thing to do. But I told you earlier I'm leaving for church camp in next month, and that's one of the reasons why we do things like church camp and like youth group activities. We want to try to help those kids in order to build up that relationship with God and that trust in them. But being a like I said, being a father is something that is a tremendous responsibility. Being a leader in the church is something that is a big responsibility. And like you said, we can't be so focused on the present distresses that we miss what's going to affect the future. And that's easy to do, and I think that's part of what a lot of these men fell prey to. But if we learn from their example, maybe we can not fall into that same trap.
Yeah, I've got to really calm down the pride in my own heart, because I see Hezekiah learn that the hard way.
Yeah, and pride is something that's interesting when you look at through the Bible, because there's examples from early in the Old Testament to late in the New Testament about people who dealt with this issue. It's a mankind issue.
Yeah.
The best of people dealt with this, and it can sneak up on you. It can be something that can doesn't hit you in the face, but you realize, well, maybe I've had a wrong attitude about this from the start. But it's for someone who is constantly being someone who is chasing after being humble, like being aware of what pride looks like, and being someone who is lives a life of thankfulness and humbleness. Maybe it helps us to fight against that, because I always say one of the best defenses against pride is being thankful for everything that you have, because that means that you're not dependent upon yourself for those things. And but it's definitely something that we need to be aware of as Christians. But as we kind of wind down here, we've kind of got to our time here, and so we may skip that last question that we have. But when you kind of put it in a big picture, when you kind of think of the scope of the story of Hezekiah, and maybe things that we can take from it, and things that we can learn from his story, as we kind of wrap up this discussion, what are you maybe like your closing thoughts on this story that we read about in the 2 Kings 18 and through 20?
Well, the main thing I would have to say is trust in God. Be faithful to God. Trust in God, because he is trustworthy. Every time Hezekiah went to him in prayer, he provided for him. He conquered the Assyrians on behalf of Judah. They didn't even have to fight the fight. God never changed. When Israel went to iniquity, and when they went to righteousness, when they went to good to bad, God stayed the same. He said, trust in me and I'll give you life. I'll give you prosperity. I'll give you everything you need. But take that trust away and I'll give you the destruction that you bringing down upon yourselves. So Hezekiah is a great example, and he's a great king because of his trust in God, and that affirmed trust, that real, genuine trust. So the lesson that I take for myself, and I think that applies to all of us, is that now, I would still call our times relative times of comfort and prosperity, trust in God, establish that trust now, teach that trust to others, build that faith in yourself and in your home, so that when the bad things come up, of course you're going to tear them down, because who wouldn't? Because that's the right thing to do. And then when good things come up, you're going to promote them and you're going to push them, because you trust in God and you're faithful to him. So that's what Hezekiah teaches me, and it's a powerful lesson we all need to learn.
Yeah, the best defenses, as I've always heard, the best defenses are built in times of prosperity. Not in times when, not at the last minute. When you're facing a threat that has come, you should already be prepared in order to face that. And so, if you're someone who is life is good, things are going well, that is awesome. That is a blessing. But use that time, like I said, to build up, those defenses, to build up, that trust in God. And so that when the time comes, when that is tested, when that is required of you, you can be someone that is ready for that. You can be prepared for that, and you can face it head on. And I think that's a lesson that we can, I know I can take from it when we read throughout the story. But Hezekiah, he's a great king to study. It's a dramatic story. Like I said, we just take a big broad overview, kind of focused on more on Hezekiah himself rather than the events that surrounded him. but we know that he rescued people from that army of 185,000, or he led the people, and God God did the work. And he went through those other events in life. It's a dramatic story. Chase, if you ever get into the movie business, I might suggest looking at the story of Hezekiah, because it's a good story for that. But
great.
As I mentioned earlier, I encourage you to read through the account yourself, and take a look at what the scriptures say. As we always say, at least I do. Look at the Bible and look at the scriptures, and don't just take my word for it, but be someone who applies yourself to studying that for yourself, because there's a lot of good we can get out of it. But Chase, it's so good to have you here tonight. We appreciate you taking the time in order to study with us, and I think we've had a good study here tonight. We appreciate the good work that you do down at Grace Point, and we hope that you will come back and see us sometime.
I'd love to, Seth. I really enjoyed the study. I grew a lot from it. I love you, and I love the good work that you're doing. So thank you, brother.
I appreciate it. And do you have, if someone is in the Jonesboro area and they want to get in contact with Grace Point, how can they do that?
Hey, check out our website, gracepointchurchofchrist.org. Give us a call. Swing by if you're in our area. We'd love to have you.
Do you know what times you meet?
Yeah, we meet. Our class on Sunday mornings is at 9:30. Worship's at 10:30, and Wednesdays is at 6:30.
All right. Well, we want to. We'll be back here next week on Thursday for another edition of the midweek Bible study. We hope that this has been something that has been beneficial to you, and we hope that this has encouraged you and lifted you up in your own walk with God. But until next time, we hope that you have a wonderful day, and we hope that you glorify God in everything that you do. And we'll catch you next time.